morning. We're here to talk about the 2015 Westminster Capital Campaign and then the building project which took place immediately thereafter. I'm Tom Wylly. Joined the church back in 1981, so many, many years ago. And my wife Pam was also involved in the project. And meet Jeff Haynes over here.
I'm Jeff Haynes. We've been a member of the church since 1994. And I had the good fortune to chair the CRC, which included Pam Wylly, Laura Folk, Carolyn Portis, Hugh Harvey, Wendell Harmer, and Kyle Armstrong as we worked on the church after these guys raised the money for 4 years.
Howard?
I'm Howard Lamar. I co-chaired the campaign with Tom on the front end of it, and out of the gate said we were crazy and we weren't going to be able to make it happen, but the Lord does amazing things. And it was a great experience and really fun to work with so many people. I just, in preparation for this, I was looking and there were 44 people on the sort of internal list that were all part of the project. And one of the great joys of it was just how many people got involved and were engaged in it. And it was a really fun time from the summer of 14 to the summer of 15.
Yeah, it might help to give some context. So our process of raising the money started in 2014, but the whole project really started before that because two things happened at the same time. Visioning, which involved 300 members of the church, was going on, and also there was a campus task force looking at a master plan. And all of that was happening before the capital campaign, and it was very important because it gave the framework for what Jeff's group did, gave us a preliminary budget of what this would cost, but most importantly with the visioning were to have the members buy into where the church wanted to go. And we were constricted by physical facilities. And so that was really the kickoff for the capital campaign, all led by Donovan. And so that's really how it got started. And then the actual fundraising process, how as I remember, we started really in the summer of 2014. And the key thing we decided was we needed a coach. We needed a consultant to help us. We hired a really good one. And part of the feedback from the coaching, Howard, if you remember, was that we needed strong leadership. We needed sacrificial giving to get this done. We needed a vision everybody was rallying around, and just a commitment of the whole church, and I think we got that.
I think that's right. And I think what I really underestimated on the front end when it seemed like a bigger task than we were capable of, I had underestimated the work that Donovan had done through the visioning that really had already led people, quite frankly, to being asked to do something. Right. And so there was, call it 24 months worth of work that had been thoughtfully put into that process, that when we engaged, ours was more of the execution of, I'll call it 120 days of meetings with pretty detailed plans and lots of input from, we had a cadre of leaders for different components of groupings of the church, whether, by age or engagement or whatever. And those people did such a great job of encouraging people to come to events. And I felt like we almost had a standing room crowd at every one of them because people were ready to engage. And Donovan should get he and the staff should get an enormous amount of credit for putting us in that place.
Jeff had a great team that got it built. We had a great team that helped make it all happen. In fact, Jeff and Lucy Haynes were in that group. The Cobans, the Devanes, the Farrs were in there, the Shockleys. I mean, there's probably another couple I'm forgetting, but some real wonderful families helped lead it. So how big a campaign? How much money do we need to raise? The campus task force looked at everything that could be done, which was a huge number, but boiled it down to the essence of two things, which Jeff could comment on. First, we had deferred maintenance of almost 20 years of not spending money on some important things, which really nobody wanted to raise money for, but was desperately needed. And then goals of new entrances, better access, expanding the parlor where we're in today. But it was $15 million was the number that the architects came up with, and you may want to comment on who they were and how that process.
Yeah, and that number was arrived at well before the committee put together. That number was come up with in the spring of 14 as they started the campaign before our committee was ever formed. And it was a swag. It was a best guess of how to tackle deferred maintenance, how to tackle entrances. But the goal of our committee, based on visioning, was how to make the church more welcoming, how to improve wayfinding within the church. People were complaining about getting lost, especially new folks the first time to the campus. And you think about 75 years of church activity and growth really without a strategic plan as we grew, and we tried to tackle all of that in our campaign.
You might comment about how we communicated that to people in our meetings in the fall and going into the winter.
It was great. My most vivid memory was, I think, our first gathering, and I think it was Earl and Sue Swenson's house, up on the hill, in this beautiful view out over the city, and there were probably, I'm going to guess, close to 50 people, and their main room sort of almost like an amphitheater, and everybody was looking out, and it was one of those thin place moments, as KC used to talk about them, where you it was the first time that I think, as the naysayer, really bought in and said, this is going to happen, because people were so committed, and it was early in just trying to get a sense and a feel for what we could achieve, and that really gave us an enormous amount of confidence, except for the fact that even as we got close to May the 3rd, which was the date of when the Highland Cathedral was played with the bagpipes. I mean, it was a stunning moment at both services. 10 days from that, we were still pretty meaningfully short, because we had only asked for certain commitments to that point, and we knew that there was this body of the church that was still going to come forward, and that ended up being over 400 pledges in the initial part of the campaign, which was pretty amazing, and it just reflected the commitment of the people here to be involved, that 400 plus families would step up to that.
In terms of, okay, so now we know we'd like to raise $15 million. That's what we need to raise. Can we do that? Well, our consultant, the one we hired and also the ones we interviewed, told us most churches are able in a capital campaign to raise 2 to 3 times their annual budget,
Right.
which for us was 6 to 9 million, not 15 million. So that was the gap between what the pros said you can count on and what we needed. So part of the tension that we were all working, but also the Holy Spirit at work, was this gap between 9 million and 15 million. So we went in the process, we had interviews in the winter, and we really started the fundraising and the requests in January and February. And to Howard's earlier point, going into the public phase of the campaign, we'd raised $10 million from 40 families here at the church, which is great. And we needed sacrificial gifts, but that's a long way from 15 million. And so what was so exciting was that when we went into the campaign, and then Commitment Sunday, which Howard mentioned, and Highland Cathedral, and everybody being here and bringing their pledge cards up, we came out of that service with pledges of $15.5 million. So it was just a spirit-filled time and a real time of celebration.
Our effort started after that Sunday. We formed the committee. Our first job was to hire an architect. We interviewed 3 architects, all with church experience. We needed somebody with deep church renovation experience, and ended up hiring Street Dixon and Rick, who fortunately had worked on our church for years, Baird Dixon. We started meeting once a week in June of 2015. The committee was fantastic. The effort was a yeoman's effort. If you think about an operational church and school that really never shuts down, how are we going to renovate this church without shutting it down? And we broke it down into 7 phases over 3 years to keep the church operational. I've been fortunate in my career to build a lot of complicated, difficult projects. This was the tops. Clearly, to keep this place running, we had 2,000 opinions. Everybody had an opinion on a paint color or a carpet color or moving a wall here, and we had to balance the opinions of the church with what was the right direction for our committee. We had to balance the neighborhood. We had a very vocal neighborhood. One neighbor was concerned about the parking lot lights shining in her kitchen window. So we had to come out here at night and look at those lights. So it was an interesting 3-year experience.
Well, you had a number of surprises, right? Deferred maintenance and then new regulatory mandates on what, fire sprinklers and the parking and
The kindergarten, the Westminster School, kindergarten had never been sprinklered. Well, in this day and age, you have to sprinkle an educational facility. That was a challenge. That particular sprinkler contractor went bankrupt in the middle of the job. So we had to bring in a second contractor and still finish the school on time to be open by September 1st. So there were lots of challenges thrown at us, but thankfully, due to American Constructors' efforts, who was our contractor, and Street Dixon Rick, and our committee had deep construction experience. Kyle Armstrong and Wendell Harmer and Hugh Harvey all were very talented and understood the job at hand, and were very committed to meet weekly for 3 years. The first phase was the school, and we had to tackle it first and foremost because it had the sprinkler system challenge, and we had to get it open. The second phase probably was Fellowship Hall and the basement and the children's area. The gym was a huge phase. Everyone wanted to renovate the gym, so we had to tackle that. And then we had the parlor, then we had the Sunday school room. Then we had the exterior. So it was a very complicated phasing project that was really based on, one, operational needs, and two, construction logistics. Can it be done in these phases?
one comment I'll make, and I really appreciated, because most of the churches that I had talked to, they hired a construction manager, which is an expensive role for an outside firm to play, and Jeff and his committee took on that role and internalized that and saved hundreds of thousands of dollars that could go into this project by doing that. So I always admired him for that.
And I will tell you very quickly, it became apparent that we were going to burn through the phase one amount of $16 million, and I went to these guys and said, I think we're going to need more money. Carolyn Portis was very adamant, thankfully, that we needed a reserve at the end of this project to handle future deferred maintenance, so we didn't have to go dip into our pockets. And so we went to these guys and said, we need a second phase. Everyone was skeptical, and thanks to their leadership, we were successful in raising the money in the second phase.
Yeah, and that was actually relatively quietly done, and was, I think, about 42 additional pledges of people who were in the process and came through amazingly. Poor Jeff. I've spent a lifetime of messing with Jeff, and we did it again here because I was like, oh, this will be easy, no problem. And not only did we not give him enough money, we then required 4 years of his life, and we gave him lots of opinions along the way. But their group did an extraordinary job with not only listening to the broader group, but staying on task and knowing what needed to be done. And there's a real gift in that, of the ability to manage both sides of that equation.
God works in strange ways. The parlor and sanctuary work, I was on them to finish on time, and as it turns out, my father passed away in January of 2018. I was pushing them to make sure this was open for his service on January 31st or February 1st. So he does work in strange ways.
In terms of the total dollars, if helpful, we raised $16 million in the first phase, but there's some attrition, families moving, other changes. So we collected about $15.5 million. Then the second phase was $2.5 million. So the total raise was $18 million. And we ended up with a reserve of between $500,000 and $750,000 or so, maybe a little more, for take care of things like roof, infrastructure here. So a lot of sacrificial giving by a lot of families.
And to the strength of this church, our attrition was less than 3%. Our consultant told us we'd have 5 to 7% attrition, and yet we had very, very little attrition, and we used all of those extra dollars in this project.
Part of the joy to me in this whole process was to watch some of the generosity of our families, because we had so many generous gifts from so many. But I remember Donovan and I were meeting with, and we were still, this is early, Howard, we were gathering lead gifts, and we needed certain lead gifts to reach certain thresholds, or we had no shot of reaching the $15 million level. So Donovan and I are meeting with this wonderful couple. They come in and we go through our presentation, and they make a very generous pledge right there at the conference table in Donovan's office, and we were so excited about it. But Donovan and I also looked at each other and knew that we were short where we needed to be at that point. And so we took the chance of asking that family that just made a very generous pledge if they would consider increasing their pledge by about a third right then. And that husband and wife said, "Can you give us a minute?" They left the office. They were back in less than 5 minutes and agreed. And we just started crying. It was such a cool moment for them, a cool moment for us. And I think that took place from smaller gifts, which were just as generous, right, to larger gifts. And you just need all those. And I remember for the $2.5 million, we were short about $200,000. We had a congregation meeting, and we were laying out what we needed. And at the end of the meeting, one of our members of the church walked up and said, "I've got room in my IRA. I'm going to donate $150,000." And Howard and I looked at each other like, "We're done. This is so great." And so just a lot of generous gifts.
And I would add, in the Phase 2 campaign, these guys came to me and said, "We need to tour people through the work." And I said, "It's not safe, it's not ready." And they said, "We got to tour people through." And so we got hard hats out, we put up yellow tape, and during the Phase 2 campaign, toured people through all of the construction activities to help raise money, to the point where one couple came in, elderly couple, we had to make sure they didn't fall. And before they had gotten to St. Thomas Hospital down West End Avenue, they called Howard in the parking lot and said, "We're in for a big number on the Phase 2 campaign." So it was very inspirational.
Yeah, there were some great moments of just people's history to this church, the impact that it had on their family members along the way, and the opportunity that they saw as to where it was going to go in the future. And here we are 5 years later from when 2018 sort of brought us all together, and we're talking about another revisioning and discernment process now, and it's on the shoulders of that work and those people that this new phase of our experience is going to happen, and this is an extraordinary place.
We failed to mention the title of the campaign was RSVP, and it was the concept of God has invited us into his work. How are we going to respond? And so the theme was, this is our time, and it's our role to step up and do this and to give sacrificially. And so that was also a cool part of it. David Rue was our head of communications. Fantastic job. So many people, Mary Handy, others that I can think of that were just fantastic key elements of this whole effort.
And I would leave the church with this. We're stewards of this facility. This is where we live out God's message to us. We got to keep taking care of this. We got to keep filling the reserve coffers. We got to pay it forward. We're going to need other projects over the next 20 to 30 years that will care for this church in the same way we did during this one.